the standard for them and the expectation is and should be gold. But the Canadians are the favorite. They should be.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 10 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. For the first time in 12 years, we finally have NHL player participation at the Winter Olympics. Now, is it a complete field of international best on best if the Russians aren't included? No, not entirely. They would probably have the third or fourth best roster on paper if they were included in this tournament. They would have two of the top wingers in the world in Nikita Kucherov and Kirill Kaprizov. They would have the best goal scorer that's ever played in Alexander Ovechkin. And they would also have some other stars sprinkled throughout their lineup. So it is a little bit annoying and disappointing when you have a tournament whose sole purpose is to crown the top hockey program in the world, and one of the top tier programs isn't included, especially when it's been over a decade since there's been NHL players involved in the Olympics. So I guess we'll call it international almost best on best at this year's Olympics, but we'll certainly take it. As I said, it's been over a decade since NHL players have been at the Olympics. And so far, through the first couple of days of group play, even though the scores for the most part have been rather lopsided, it's still been very entertaining to watch, both on the ice with the teams involved and off the ice with the atmosphere from the fans that they have brought to the arena supporting their nations. It's been really, really interesting and fun to take in. So on today's show, we'll talk about some of the games so far in group play. We'll also talk about standards, right? For Hockey Canada, the standard for them is always gold or bust. They are the gold standard. They've earned that right. Gold medalists in 2002, gold medalists in 2010, gold medalists in 2014. The last two times the NHL has sent players to the Olympics, Hockey Canada has won gold. So any tournament that they play in, whether it's at the pro level or the amateur level, gold is the standard for Canada. To be the man, you have to beat the man. And Canada, heading into these games, they are the man. But what about for the Americans? What about Team USA? What's the standard for Team USA? Is it gold or bust for the Americans in the 2026 Winter Olympic Games in Milano Cortina? We'll get to that. But before we do, just a friendly reminder that if you haven't done so already, to please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. And if you want to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show @thepuckups, or you can call and leave a voicemail to be aired right here on the show by dialing 617-539-6958. Again, that's 617-539-6958. To the games we go. Let the games begin. The 2026 Men's Hockey Olympic Tournament. I gotta say, you don't know what you have until it's gone. And some of my greatest memories watching hockey as a kid were the Olympic Games, and that's including 2006 when the Americans didn't have a great tournament. But My first memory of taking in Olympic hockey is the '02 games in Salt Lake City. I remember watching those games passionately. I was under 10 years old, and that run to the gold medal game at Salt Lake City was so fun. And of course, my my heart was broken when Hockey Canada beat the Americans in the gold medal game. Paul Correa, who was my favorite player growing up, was on the Canadians roster, and he had an unbelievable uh, assist. I want to say to Joe Sakic, where Mario Lemieux just let the puck go between his legs in transition, and Korea found Sakic back door, or maybe it was a Ginla. I don't really recall who was on the receiving end, but man, the '02 Olympics is my first memory. Obviously, the 1980 Olympics for American hockey is is quite the story. Movies made about it. Obviously, the Miracle on Ice um, team, which I wasn't around for, but obviously Miracle is my favorite movie. So Olympic hockey is just a different animal. It's a different breed, and it's so much different than watching, the NHL. It's just when it's nation versus nation, and you're seeing NHL players who are normally rivals with each other, battling each other in the regular season for years in the playoffs, and they put their differences aside for the the crest of their country on their jersey. There's something really cool about international hockey especially when NHL players are involved. So the '02 Olympics were awesome. My first memory, my firsthand memory of watching the Olympics. I don't recall watching them in the '90s. I remember in 2006, I was obsessed with that run. As I said, the team didn't do too well, and then you fast forward to 2010, and they go to the gold medal game. They beat Canada in the round robin, and then the golden goal by Sidney Crosby. 2014, you had TJ Sochi with the the amazing shootout performance against the Russians in Sochi. So then you go a decade plus without it, and you just don't realize what you have in life until it's gone. And now that NHL participation is back at the Olympics this winter, it's something that we can all kind of rejoice in as hockey fans and really look forward to a strong tournament. And with that said, let us go to the first action that took place in this men's tournament, which was with Group B on Wednesday. And Group B saw the first upset of the tournament right away in game one. Slovakia defeats Finland 4-1. Finland were heavy favorites heading into this game. They heavily outshot the Slovakians, but Slovakia was opportunistic and they were stingy. And the Finns, to me, they were playing too cute. They didn't have the best performance at the Four Nations. They were obviously without Miro Heiskanen in that short tournament. This time around, they have Heiskanen, but they don't have Alex Barkov, who would be their top center and arguably their top forward. Depends if you think he's better than Mikko Rantanen or not, but they're different positions. Let's call them equal. So I just thought that the Finns were too cute. They passed up on a lot of scoring chances, and they'll do better off playing more straight line hockey going forward, especially against Sweden, because now you really have to win out, including beating Sweden, if you want to win Group B, if you're the Finns. Slovakia, on the other hand, again, they were opportunistic. Juraj Slavkovsky, young Canadians forward. It's his second Olympic appearance. He was 17 years old when he represented Slovakia in the 2022 Olympic Games. Of course, he wasn't in the NHL at that time, so he was able to have participation. And it was a statement game for the Slovakians and, a wake-up call for the Finns. And, not just the Finns, but anybody else in this tournament that's a favorite. going into a game against an underdog. It's a lesson for favorites to not take anybody lightly, and it's also inspiration for underdogs to see what Slovakia did against the Finns and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we can upset somebody too. So that was a fun first game too, because I talked about the atmosphere and fans traveling near and far to Milano Cortina to take in these games and cheer on their nation playing. And these fans, the atmosphere is so much different than what you see in North America professional sporting arenas. It's very European soccer-esque, the way that these fans cheer on their teams. They're constantly chanting, they're constantly singing and waving their flags, and they're painting their faces, and it's just really cool. And the Slovakian fans were an example of this in the first game. And because their team outperformed the Finns, they had a lot to cheer for. So that was a very jarring way to start the men's tournament, with a 4-1 win for Slovakia over the Finns. Not many people probably saw that coming, outside of maybe the Slovakian locker room and supporters. And then Sweden defeated Italy 5-2. And even though it's a 3-goal difference, this game was a lot closer than the score would indicate right now. And that's not a good thing for Team Sweden when the Italians, who have no NHL representation whatsoever on their roster, take a team that is, I want to say, entirely made up of NHL players. They dragged them into a dogfight, and it was back and forth for the first half of the game. And Sweden, you know, they got the win, and maybe they're just getting their feet wet there. But you know, if you're Sweden, if you're Finland, I don't think that's a start that either team really wanted for their tournament. Obviously Finland, lost. So, it's definitely not the start that they wanted, but Sweden gets the win. Not really a convincing win against a team that really it should have been a lot further than 5-2. Nonetheless, Sweden gets the win and they'll move on. So Group B got off to a interesting start, an unexpected start, I would say, on Wednesday. Moving along, we'll go over to Group A. In Group A, we have Canada, who defeated the Czech Republic 5-0. Now, this game was a very, very professional game by the Canadians. I said it earlier online, but what impressed me most, their speed, their skill is obvious, and everybody knows how much talent the Canadians possess, especially at the forward position. But not every all-star roster gels and has chemistry right away. And what impressed me the most about the Canadians were their attention to detail on and off the puck. And everybody seemed to be accepting of their roles. I mean, again, you have to remember, all of these players are used to being the top player on their NHL roster, or among the top players on their NHL roster. And so you're asking guys that are used to playing 20 minutes a night to, some of them are playing 5 minutes. Some are still playing 20 or more. But you have to be accepting of your role and put your ego aside for the betterment of the team. And I just thought that Canada came out and completely outclassed the Czech Republic, who are without Pavel Zacha. And, Zacha is a big loss for the Czechs. He not only is a big loss in and of himself as a center iceman, probably their top center iceman, or at least their second center iceman behind Hurdle, but he has built-in chemistry with the Czech Republic's top player in David Pastrnak, and Pastrnak just kind of looked lost out there. Again, Pastrnak and Zacha, of course, play together in Boston, and they've built a lot of chemistry over the last 3 or 4 seasons. It just felt like Pastrnak was kind of, I don't know, lost out there at times. He's a dominant player who didn't really impact the game too much. Now, Canada's speed and skill and depth will overwhelm any lesser team, and I think that David Pastrnak, along with Marty Necas and Tomas Hertl and Andre Palat and Philip Ronak, like guys like that they were leaning on, they were getting taxed because the Czech Republic doesn't have the depth that obviously Canada has. So when Canada's throwing over McDavid, Celebrini on one shift, and then McKinnon and Crosby on another, and it's an embarrassment of riches. Marner and Stone, and it's just there's too much talent to keep up with if you're the Czechs in that game. So a very workmanlike win for Canada, who just took care of business. And for the Czech Republic, they're gonna have to bounce back against France and the Swiss. But as I said in the last episode, I expected Canada to obviously walk right through this group, and the Czech Republic I anticipated to finish probably in the 5 or 6 seed, not getting a bye to the quarterfinals. They'll probably have to go into the play-in round, but I do expect them to defeat whoever they play in the play-in round and make their way to the quarterfinals. As for the Swiss and Team France, I mean, Switzerland, they had a 2-0 lead heading into the third period. Timo Meier, 2 goals for the Swiss. An admirable game for the French. I mean, they were definitely overmatched a bit. There is some really good talent on Team Switzerland, good NHL talent led by Roman Josi, Nico Hischier, Timo Meier, Kevin Fiala. There are, Jonas Siegenthaler. There are some players, JJ Moser, I mean, for Tampa Bay, who also had a goal for the Swiss in this game. So there's some NHL talent to go around that Swiss lineup. It's not as deep as Canada, US, Finland, Sweden, but they have some talent there. And for the France team, who only have Alexander Texier as a current NHL player on their roster, I think Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is a former NHL player on France's roster. Stefan DaCosta played at Merrimack College about a little over a decade ago at this point, about 15 years ago, and maybe more, actually, 17 years ago. And, he had a cup of coffee in the NHL for maybe 10 games or so back in like 2011, 12. So it's been a while. There's not much North American professional experience on that French roster. So, they had a good amount of shots. They were in that game. It was 2-0 until Timo Meier kind of blew the door open late for Team Switzerland. So right now, the Canadians, as expected, have a strong grasp on Group A. Heading over to Group C, we'll start off with Germany. Now, Germany and Denmark played at the exact same time as the Americans and Team Latvia, so that was difficult for somebody trying to watch every single game. But of course, my allegiance lies with the American game, so I took in all of that and very little of the Germany-Denmark game, at least live. But for Germany, their big boys showed up. Leon Draisaitl had a goal. Tim Stützle had a goal. So Draisaitl had a goal in the first 30 seconds of the game. And so, the Germans, they aren't expected to win this group. The Americans are expected to win this group, of course. But you can't overlook Team Germany's top-end talent. Leon Draisaitl, Tim Stützle, Moritz Seider, JJ Peterka. Those are 4. I mean, Draisaitl is one of the best forwards in the world, not named Connor McDavid. Mo Seider is a Norris candidate this year. Tim Stützle is over a point per game player, number 1 center for the Ottawa Senators. JJ Peterka is a top line winger for the Utah Mammoth. And they have some other NHL talent on their roster too. Nico Sturm is more of a middle 6 forward at the NHL level, but he's on Team Germany. And there are some other younger players as well, but Germany did what they had to do in this one, and they got the win over the Danes. Now, USA and Latvia. This game is 5-1 final. Felt like it could have been a lot more. The U.S. obviously had 2 goals taken away from them in the first period. One that was maybe a centimeter offside. One of those offside calls where it didn't affect the play at all. But technically, if you zoom in on the freeze frame as close as you possibly can, you would notice that it was barely offsides. And then Brock Nelson had a tip-in goal later in the first period that was waved off for goalie interference, which there wasn't really any interference to speak of. It was just the fact that JT Miller's feet were in the crease, which is an international no in the rule book. So again, it didn't impact the tip-in goal. The U.S. they cleanly scored on Latvia on Elvis Merzlikins, but again, the goal did not stand. So Brady Tkachuk got the scoring started for the U.S. in this game off a pass from his brother Matthew in transition. 1-0 U.S. Quinn Hughes made it 2-0 for a brief moment, but that was the offside goal that was called back. So that goal comes off the board, and then wouldn't you know it, the way hockey works, one thing happens bad for one team, it gives life to the other. The Latvians go down the other end and tie the game 1-1 on a greasy goal in the crease. And then obviously Brock Nelson, as I said, gets the tip-in goal called back, so it stays 1-1. So in an alternative world, the U.S. is up 3-1 after the first period, but instead it's 1-1. As the game went on, though, the U.S.'s speed and skill just completely took over, and they had a lot of finesse passing plays and scoring plays. Jack Hughes with a couple of beautiful assists. Matthew Tkachuk had a couple of assists. Austin Matthews scores a goal. Brock Nelson scores a couple of goals. The U.S. just completely overwhelmed Latvia as that game went along. Now, Latvia was scrappy. They certainly were scrappy, especially in the first half of the game before the U.S. really took over. And, they have some big bodies, and they were playing physical. And Latvia, they're an international program that plays together a lot. This American team, especially because the NHL hasn't been on the international stage in quite some time, these American players, it's been a long time since they played together, probably since they were at the national program, for those who were there at the same time. And obviously 4 Nations, a lot of these guys played together for a couple of games, but chemistry is something that a lot of these powerhouses like Canada and the US, they don't really have the luxury of chemistry because the NHL hasn't had players play internationally for so long, certainly for most of these players' careers. So they might be all-star rosters, but there's a lot of chemistry that they still have to kind of gain on the fly in a short tournament like the Olympics. So with all of that said, when it comes to Team USA, as I asked earlier, is it gold or bust for the Americans? What do you think? Because I look at their roster and I look at how they played against the Latvians. Now, obviously, Team Latvia is a far cry from Team Sweden, Team Finland, Czech Republic. Hell, definitely a far cry from the Canadians, right? But if you look at the roster and you look at the talent that the Americans have put on the NHL stage over the last decade or so, the gap between them and the Canadians, isn't even there, right? I mean, as I said on our preview episode, the Canadians definitely have the best forward group in the entire tournament. I mean, Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Sidney Crosby, just to name your top 3 centers. And it's, if Sidney Crosby is your third line center, then what is there to even say? But then you have young phenoms like Macklin Celebrini, right, that are just up and coming. So the Canadians forward group is the best in the tournament, no doubt about it. But on paper, the Americans have the best decor in the tournament and the best goaltending in the tournament and the second best forward core in the tournament. Team USA has come so far. USA Hockey has come so far since the last time the NHL has had players play in the Olympics. And just as an example, I'm going to read off right now the 2014 U.S. men's Olympic roster for Team USA. This is the last time that the NHL played in the Olympics. This is the roster that the Americans sent. David Backes, Dustin Brown, Ryan Callahan, John Carlson, Justin Falk, Cam Fowler, Jimmy Howard, Patrick Kane, Ryan Kessler, Phil Kessel, Paul Martin, Ryan McDonough, Ryan Miller, Brooks Orpik, TJ Oshie, Max Pacioretty, Zach Parise, Joe Pavelski, Jonathan Quick, Kevin Shattenkirk, Paul Stastny, Derek Stepan, Ryan Suter, James Van Riemsdyk, and Blake Wheeler. Here's their roster for 2026. Matt Boldy, Kyle Connor, Jack Eichel, Brock Faber, Jake Gensel, Noah Hanifin, Connor Hellebuck, Jack Hughes, Quinn Hughes, Clayton Keller, Jackson Lacombe, Dylan Larkin, Austin Matthews, Charlie McAvoy, JT Miller, Brock Nelson, Jake Ottinger, Jake Sanderson, Jacob Slavin, Jeremy Swayman, Tage Thompson, Brady Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk, Vinny Trocheck, Zach Werenski. And then, of course, Jason Robertson and Cole Caulfield are the two top American goal scorers in the NHL this year, and they're not on the roster. So that 2014 U.S. roster I read off, it was a blue-collar roster. And they fought tooth and nail with the Canadians in the semifinals and lost a close one. I think they lost 1-0. And their roster that they brought to the Olympics in 2010, where they beat the Canadians and then lost in the gold medal game to Sidney Crosby in overtime, that roster was relatively blue collar. Like, you have Patrick Kane on both of those rosters. You have Phil Kessel. You know, there was some skill. John Carlson's on the 14 roster. He had some skill and some youth at the time. But the roster that I just read off, the speed and the skill is night and day. Night and day. Jack Eichel, Austin Matthews, Jack Hughes, Quinn Hughes, Kyle Connor, Dylan Larkin, Charlie McAvoy, the Tkachuk brothers. Like, it's the Matt Boldy, the talent, Tage Thompson. It's stupid talent. So it's a long-winded way of me saying that, yes, it's absolutely gold or bust for the Americans. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Now, unfortunately, they're kind of in between a rock and a hard place, because the standard for them and the expectation is and should be gold. But the Canadians are the favorite. They should be. Right? I mean, they're the defending champions of the world when it comes to NHL players at the Olympics. The Canadians have won the last 2 Olympic games and 3 of the last 4 when NHL players are at the Olympics. 2018, 2022. Listen, good stories for the Olympic athletes of Russia and Team Finland, but with all due respect to the athletes who participated in those games, it wasn't best on best. And I know that here in America, we glorify the 1980 Olympic hockey team, and that was a team full of amateurs. Now, technically, the Soviets in that tournament, they were technically not professional athletes because they were soldiers via paperwork, but their job was to play hockey. So they were professional athletes. They beat the NHL All-Stars months before the Olympic Games. But as I said, they were soldiers. So they weren't professional athletes. Well, they were. And that's why Miracle on Ice is a Miracle on Ice, because it was a bunch of young amateur college kids who defeated unofficially professional athletes, Russian athletes who were just dominating the world of hockey for 2 decades. And the reason I bring that up is that Miracle on Ice story is such a amazing sports story because it wasn't professional athletes for the Americans. And even in the movie, now this I don't think it was a real quote from Herb Brooks. It may have just been Disney taking some liberties with the script. But Herb Brooks says at the end of the game or at the end of the movie that the following Olympics, they started using NHL players at the Olympics and started having dream teams. And he says, which is ironic because now that we have dream teams, there's no more reasons to dream. And so, fast forward to modern day in the last the last 20, 30 years, it has been dream teams, but that's the way that the world has gone the last 2-3 decades, and it's what we're used to now. So I don't mean to demean or belittle the 2018 and 2022 Olympic Games because they weren't professional athletes, or they weren't NHL athletes, at least. It's a great story for those players in particular, but we can't in good conscience look at the 2022 and 2018 Olympics and where Canada didn't win gold and say that, hey, they haven't won the last few Olympics, because that's technically true, but we all know the score there. So for the Americans this year, it is difficult because they have the expectations of winning gold. That's what they're putting on themselves, and that's what the outside world is putting on them. Obviously, in Canada, the gold they think belongs to them. But it's not an easy spot for the Americans to have the same standard as the Canadians, which is gold, but you're not the favorite. So if they're not the favorite, then they should be saying, well, what's with the expectations on us to win gold if we're not the favorite? But they're so close to the Canadians. And honestly, the Canadians are the favorites because of pedigree. The Canadians are the favorites because they have the 3 best players in the world on their roster, but they also have a bunch of players that have won big games, both at the NHL level and internationally. I mean, Sidney Crosby is the most decorated player that's currently playing. They have a bunch of Stanley Cup champions on their roster and guys that have won at every level and every stage. And Hockey Canada, until they're dethroned with NHL representation at the Olympics, they are the favorite. But I think there's a real argument to be made that the Americans have the best overall roster at the tournament. And if that's the case, then you bet your ass that you should be winning gold. That should be the standard. So we'll see how the rest of the tournament plays out. And as far as the Americans and the Canadians go, they have to take care of business themselves if they want to meet each other at some point. I imagine that if the Americans win Group C and the Canadians win Group A, I imagine that their goal differentials will be so great that they'll probably be 1 and 2 in the standings overall, and that they'll probably be put into different brackets at the quarterfinals. And so if they win out in the playoffs or the medal round, they should be on a collision course for the gold medal game. There could be a scenario where they meet in the semifinals, but I'm not expecting that. So hopefully both teams can take care of business and we can see a not even David versus Goliath, Goliath versus Goliath matchup in the gold medal game. So that'll do it for this episode. There'll be a lot more to talk about next week because I believe group play should conclude by over the weekend. And so we should have a better idea of the I would imagine that the 5 through 12 seeds will still be playing each other in the qualification round next time that we record. So I'm not sure if we'll have the quarterfinal bracket by next episode or not. But either way, enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much for listening. Again, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else that you get your podcast. And thank you very much for listening. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday.